Hi, welcome to another episode of Education Matters. We hope you enjoy this program. If you've been watching us before, please subscribe so that you can get a notice of our events right away. Today, we'll be talking about a really interesting issue that's new. The use of cell phones in schools by our students, whether to ban them or regulate them in some fashion or the other. With me will be is Mark Sidemer. Mark is the chair of the school law practice group at Shank, Price, Smith, and King. So, welcome, Mark. How are you?
Ray, nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me as a guest on the show. I'm used to doing the podcast versions. It's nice to do it by live video.
Well, it's good. I wanted everyone to see you, uh, and not just hear you.
I
Attorney
appreciate
should
that.
be
Thank you.
seen and heard. Uh,
All right.
but first, before we get into how long you've been with the firm, and how long you've been practicing school law?
Yeah, so I've been with Shank Price since about 2010, and I've been practicing school law for quite a long time, almost 30 years now. So it's been a long time. I've been doing this for a while.
Okay, well, we're going to get kind of right into it. Um, First of all, cell phones have been an issue. So I think districts have been handling it differently. But do districts have the ability to regulate the use of cell phones by students in their schools?
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, Ray, one of the main functions of a school board is to set policy. And so, setting a policy around a topic like cell phone use in schools, I think, is absolutely within the purview of the school district. It's within their scope of authority, and I think the topic is certainly one that is appropriate for putting some guidelines and parameters around. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Department of Education just put out an edict encouraging school districts to develop policies in this area.
Yeah, I did see that. And for those who are listening, you can see the article on that in school board notes. So you work with districts, I'm sure, that have taken different ways of looking at this. Um, so why did they look to address it, and what are they concerned about?
Yeah, so I think school districts are concerned probably about two different things. One is the growing research and studies that show that we don't want our kids to be on their phones from the time they wake up in the morning till the time they go to bed at night. It's been shown that it's got a serious impact on students' mental health, um, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things. And there's feelings out there, correctly so, that there should be downtime from those devices, and school is an appropriate place for there to be downtime. The second thought is that allowing students to be on their phones in school is really a tremendous distraction, which impacts them academically. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a recent study that was put out by Pew Research Center out of Washington, D.C., where teachers surveyed, I think it was 72% of high school teachers said that cell phone use in schools was a major distraction, which was causing students to suffer academically. I think Rutgers did a similar study where it showed that when they allowed students to be on their phones in class, there was basically like a half a letter point grade reduction for those students who are on their phones in class. So it affects them mental health wise, and it also has a serious academic impact as well. And that's why schools have gotten wise to this and said, you know, something, we really need to put some policies in place, some regulations in place, so that we can regulate when students are allowed to be on their phones in school and when they're not.
Yeah, I can understand that because I think adults, we are also distracted by my phone because I know the minute it dings, it's instinctive that I look down at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I can imagine if you have 25 kids in the class, it'd be hard for all 25 not to be distracted, at least at one point or another. And I take it from your answer. I know that districts, you've dealt with districts that have different types of bans, and we'll get into that. Does it vary? Does it seem to be more of as the kids get older, it seems to be more and more of an issue?
Yeah, I would say that I've seen policies that run the gamut. So I've seen school district policies that are a little more flexible, I would say, with use at the high school level, for instance, whereas those policies will say, for instance, that at the middle school or elementary school level, students are not allowed to have their phones on at all during the school day, period, end of story. They must be in a locker, they must be in a backpack. Whereas at the high school level, we'll have language that says you can't have them on in class, but you can have them on, for instance, in the cafeteria at lunch, maybe during passing time. So I've kind of seen it run the gamut, like I said, in terms of what's permitted, what's not. Some schools say that the students have to put the phones in a pouch when they get into class, and the teacher basically holds the phone and then they're returned to them at the end of the class. Others say they have to be kept in the locker. So, there's really, I don't think, one size fits all approach to every school district. I think you have to see what works in your district. And I think these policies are evolving. And so they're not set in stone. And if something's working well, great. And if it's not working, we always have the right as a school board to modify our policies to reflect what's actually working.
So if a district's moving in this, a Board of Ed and the administration is moving into this, they have to take a lot of things into consideration. I would imagine the first is, how do you communicate it to the students, the staff, and the parents and general community? But how do they go about doing that? Because I'm sure there might be some pushback, maybe not from the teachers, but definitely from the students.
Yeah, so I always believe that when you have an important topic like this that involves so many different levels, teachers, staff, students, it's always great to get stakeholder involvement. Find out from the teachers what their point of view is. They're the ones on the front lines dealing with these issues. What's realistic? What's not realistic? We want to find out from the students, look, not that they're the final decision makers, but getting them to agree and to kind of buy into what's reasonable and what's not is, I think, a really good idea. And then parents as well. I've seen studies that parents say 66% of parents feel that students should be allowed to have their phones in school, but I think only 30% of parents believe that students should be able to have them on in class, because the parents like the idea that if there's an emergency or something like that, they can still get in touch with their own child. But, bottom line, I think involving all of the stakeholders when you develop a policy is a great idea, because the more buy-in you have, the more likely it is that your policy is going to be successful, as opposed to just unilaterally coming up with something that you're going to kind of shove down everybody's throat and expect them to adhere to. I don't think that's a good way to go about it. And so involving everybody is a good idea. And by the way, as you know, when a school district adopts a policy, there's 2 readings. So the public always has a right after the first reading and before adoption on the second reading to come to the microphone at a board meeting and express their viewpoints. And I have seen boards change policies between a first and a second reading based on some good input that we've received at meetings.
So would you recommend that they should probably really publicize this so that people are aware of it? It's not a surprise, like the first day of school, all of a sudden they find out they can't use this.
Yeah, I agree. I think
it's kind of be something that everyone's aware of, whether they like it or not, they're aware of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think putting people on notice that this is something that we're going to consider is a good idea, as opposed to just burying it in a board agenda somewhere and kind of slipping it through and then letting everybody know, hey, everybody, just want to let you know we've got this new policy on the books and here's the requirement, without making sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard.
Just one follow-up on that. I would imagine from that you might get pushback from the students, all students like that. And you kind of touched on the parents' views on it. From your experience with the districts you work with, are the parents is the staff probably more supportive and maybe more encouraging of a policy like this?
Yeah, I think the staff is supportive of having a policy in place that restricts use in class. The teachers see it as a huge distraction. They're trying to teach lessons and the kids are on their phone. So based in my experience, teachers are very happy to have these policies in place. The concern that I've heard from teachers really goes to issues of enforcement. I don't think teachers want to be in the business of taking kids' phones away and having to spend their class time disciplining students for being on their phone. So I think they like the concept. I think the concern sometimes, just like any policy, I guess, is about how we're going to enforce it, what are the repercussions going to be, and so forth. And I do think that it's a good idea, either in the policy or probably more appropriate for a regulation, for the district to spell out, what are the penalties going to be for various infractions? Are we going to collect them at the beginning of class? Are we going to put them in pouches? Are we going to confiscate them on a first offense? Those are things that the boards need to consider. Some of my clients have kind of decided, let's go with the policy first, and then let's see how it plays out, and then we can later, which is fine, later develop the regulation, kind of the fine points, if you will, of the policy.
So I was going to ask you about enforcement. So I guess that might be something that might evolve as well, to see what works and doesn't work. So from what you just told me is that staff feels, teachers anyway, could feel uncomfortable just taking someone's cell phone away, which I can understand. So enforcement is probably the one thing that should be discussed with the administration as to how they see enforcement.
Yeah, I definitely think enforcement is a big part of it, because, as you know, you can have a policy on the books, but unless it's enforced and actually enforceable, it's not going to be very meaningful. So it's got to be, it's got to spell out what the requirements are, and quite frankly, what are going to be the repercussions for students who violate these policies. And I believe there should always be a sliding scale. A first offense may be just a simple warning to put it away, but second, third offense, you may want to have greater penalties, and then maybe ultimately banning the student from having the phone in school at all. But these are things that need to be thought about and considered, and that's why I think involving the stakeholders is a good idea, to see what's realistic.
So, and can they confiscate someone's personal opinion of personal property? Like maybe just for the day or something, but can they take students away and say, okay, you snuck it into classroom? Do they have that ability on that part?
Yeah, I certainly believe that a school official has a right to confiscate a student's phone, have the teacher hold on to it, keep it in the main office, return it at the end of the day. I don't know if they could keep it in perpetuity. That's their property. But I certainly think during the course of the school day, where a school official stands, what they say, in loco parentis, meaning in place of the parent, they can certainly hold on to that phone to a future point in time. I think that's absolutely within a school official's rights.
Technology is evolving. It's not just a cell phone. I have a watch here that sometimes tells time, but sometimes tells me my emails and sometimes tells me my heart rate. So is it just cell phones, or do they have to look at all devices that could be possibly?
Most of these policies have a pretty broad definition of what it means to, some of them don't even use the word cell phone necessarily. They talk about electronic devices, which could be a cell phone, obviously. I don't think people have pagers anymore, but it used to include pagers, smart watches, those sorts of things. And I do think that one of the loopholes I've heard a lot about lately is the smartwatches, where you can pretty much do everything on a smartwatch that you can on a phone, and they're wearing it on their wrist. And many of the policies I've seen have addressed the issue of smartwatches, and they basically say that you're allowed to have them. However, they're for timekeeping purposes only. So in other words, once you start playing around on your phone during class and it's pretty clear that you're texting or you're on the internet or whatever you shouldn't be doing, that would be a clear violation of the policy. I haven't seen schools ban smartwatches.
Yeah,
it is an issue.
Okay, I would think it would be an issue because, and there might be a future device down the road that we're not even thinking of right now.
I'm sure there will be.
Can there be exceptions? For medical or maybe educational reasons, maybe someone needs it for addition. It's their calculator. Certain students.
Yeah, I think the policy should certainly have exceptions, and some of the exceptions that I've seen are for students who have IEPs that have language in them that say, for whatever reason, the student needs to have a phone or some other device like that in class with him or her. I've seen exceptions for health-related type issues. So for students who have, for instance, like an individual health plan, where they may have an app on their phone that maybe monitors their blood sugar, for example, that would also be an appropriate use, perhaps, of having the device in class. It would have to be through a plan. Obviously, the teacher, the principal, and all the school officials who would need to know should be informed that this is an exception to our general policy. So those are some examples. Another example might be where the teacher permits it, where the students are going to be using their phones for a lesson, where the phone is going to be part of accessing the internet for a part of a curricular reason. So those are some that come to mind: health-related reasons, instructional, educational-related reasons. I always think any good policy should probably carve out a few exceptions, and this policy is no exception either.
Okay. Now, I know if I was a student and I couldn't have my cell phone, I'd be looking to see if the teacher had a cell phone out on their desk that was available, or they might even glance at once in a while, like maybe while I'm doing some work. Is there a related or something that you have to do with the staff as well, so, in this area?
So, just like we don't want our students to be on their phone during class doing things that are unrelated to school, the same holds true, obviously, with our staff, with our teachers, our paraprofessionals, those who are on the front lines with our kids. I don't necessarily think we need a policy on cell phone use for staff. I think really teachers are adults, they're professionals, they know that they can't be on them. And to me, that's really up to the administration to enforce. I think it may be deemed a little bit insulting if we had a policy for adults saying they can't be on their phones. I think that's just generally known and accepted. And like I said, that's up to the school principal or the superintendent or whoever it may be to enforce that and to make sure that the teachers are teaching and not playing on their phones in class. I don't. So bottom line, I don't think we need a policy for staff necessarily about not being on their phones.
But you probably should. The administration might say, maybe it comes up in teacher evaluation that where you're using the cell phone when you're taking away from students. So it's just more of an administrative purview.
Yeah, and I do think that the administration should make it clear to the staff that they're not to be on their phones for non-school related purposes during the class time. I think that should be very clearly spelled out. But to me, that could be spelled out at a faculty meeting, for instance. I don't think it necessarily has to be codified in any type of policy or regulation.
Now, I know your firm and you personally are in a good number of districts. What has the impact been on the districts? Is it something that has drawn a lot of criticism, or is it something that once it gets going, everyone kind of gets used to it?
Yeah, I have to say, Ray, this one has surprised me a little bit, because when I first found out that a bunch of my clients were coming up with these policies and developing them, and they were going to implement them, a lot of them for the beginning of this school year, my thought was, oh my God, we're going to have some crazy board meetings where there are going to be 3,000 people screaming and yelling at us that how dare you take away phones from kids. But it's actually been the opposite. It's been very quiet. They've gone through with very little fanfare, even though they've been pretty well publicized. A lot of support from parents, and the kids really haven't pushed back. The students haven't pushed back. So they've gone through much more smoothly than I would have anticipated, and they're working. And like I said before, the districts realize that their work's in progress. This is a unique, novel topic that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, and you're right. This is a kind of uncharted territory, just like AI is. And you come up with something that you think is appropriate, and you monitor it throughout the course of the school year, and you find out from teachers and students and parents what's working, what's not working, what don't we like, what's been good about enforcement, what's been difficult about enforcement, and you modify the policy as such. So it's gone really, really well, as a matter of fact, to my surprise.
Yeah, actually, I haven't heard of where it's been, controversial, where people are swarming at board meetings and the administration. But would you recommend, though, at the end of the school year, okay, let's have a little discussion or the administration give a report to the board about how they felt it worked with
Yeah, I think that's a great
input from the
idea.
staff.
Yeah, and a lot of my school board clients have asked the administration, hey, maybe at the halfway point, why don't we report back to our policy committee or to the full board about how we're doing so far, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So yeah, I always think that's a good idea, and quite frankly, I think that's a good idea pretty much with all policies, not just the cell phone policy.
That's true. That's why you're a good board attorney. Also, the other thing you mentioned in the beginning about the U.S. Department of Education, but other people have been weighing in on this issue. The New Jersey Department of Education has put out something a while ago, and as I was even surprised, the Surgeon General. Could you just touch on
Yeah,
that a little?
yeah, that's true. So in August of this year, the New Jersey Department of Education issued this broadcast memorandum to schools, basically encouraging school districts to take a good look at the use of cell phones in schools and coming up with a policy. So they issued a broadcast memorandum. They also came up with a web page called Considerations for Establishing or Refining Policies on Cell Phone Usage, which kind of helps school districts develop policies. So the DOE, New Jersey DOE, has weighed in heavily. I mentioned before that the U.S. Department of Education just weighed in this week on this topic and is encouraging school boards to come up with policies. And then I think it was last year, the Surgeon General of the United States issued an advisory, almost a call to action on the use of cell phones by our youth, the use of social media, and some of the impacts that that's having on students' mental health. And it was kind of an ask, if you will, for students, families, technology companies, et cetera, to take a look at this so that they could get a better understanding about the impact of social media and mobile devices on our children and the impact that it's having on education. So it's a hot topic at the state level. It's a hot topic at the national level. I think there's probably about 10 or so states that have already come up with laws requiring schools to either come up with policies or banning phones in schools entirely. There have been governors that have issued executive orders on this subject. So it's certainly a topic that's getting a lot of attention.
Two things before we come to a close. First of all, from my experience with the districts that have done it, there might be a little ruffled feathers in the beginning, but it seems like the students and the staff fall into a routine fairly quickly. That I come in, put my cell phone in the pouch, and just go to class, and then I take it out on my way out. And it seems like it's been more accepted than I had really anticipated
Mm-hmm.
by the students. And though I have heard that students are trying to figure out ways to get around it. And so that's another reason that you probably have to continually look at your policy and your procedures here, because the students are sometimes trying to find ways around some of these things.
Shocking.
I see. I never would have done that as a kid, but I know that I was perfect.
And I think that the smart watches, I should say, are everybody has them these days. So that's
And
pretty.
they'll be asking for them for Christmas for this very reason.
Yeah, and it's probably harder to detect. It's easier if a teacher sees a student on their phone. It's a bigger device, obviously, than just kind of peering down at their watch or playing around with their watch and that sort of thing. But I think we had to start somewhere, right? But it's generally working from what I'm understanding.
Okay, so maybe there's some districts out there who haven't really delved into this yet, but I know a lot of them are thinking about it. What should they do to get started? What are some of the basic things that they should do from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think for a school district that's considering it, they absolutely should, and probably sooner than later have a policy on the books. The nice thing is that there's a lot of school districts that have already done it, both in New Jersey and all over the country. So the point is, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think if I were advising a board on coming up with a policy from scratch, I would say, why don't you look to see what other districts have done? What do you think is going to work in our district? And let's roll it out. There should be some very clear guidelines in our policy as to what's expected. We should get input from stakeholders, the ones we talked about before: teachers, students, staff, parents, and come up with something that's workable and continue to monitor it and refine it as required. And then make sure that it's clear in terms of what our expectations are. That's the most important thing. What are the clear expectations, and what are the repercussions if it's not adhered to by the students?
Okay, thank you. Just for those who are listening and watching, we NJSBA does have a policy department that has other districts' policies in an area. So you could request that if you're looking to go in that direction, see what districts are doing. And you might want to get a district that's similar to yours, whether it's a K through 8 or a high school district.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, Mark, do you have any other final thoughts before we go? I think you covered everything very well.
The only final thought is, in terms of, like I said, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Maybe it's not a bad idea to have maybe a board member or the superintendent reach out to those other boards that have already had them in place for several months to get other board members' inputs and administrator input as well, to see, the good and the bad as to their policies, and maybe some suggestions they may have for another school district considering implementing them too. I think that communication is always a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Districts, yeah.
To see how you don't want to repeat their mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mark, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this program today.
Thank you for having me.
Always, you bring some good insight because you're in so many different districts. So hope everyone enjoyed this Education Matters. And I have to answer my cell phone now. It's going off. So
thank you again, Ray. I appreciate it.
Okay. Everyone have a great day.